everyone. So I'm Katie, the talent partner at Gradient. For those who don't know me, I've had just the best day today. So thank you all for being here. It's been super fun to catch up with a lot of you. And we actually have two Gradient founders joining us today on stage. So we are going to talk about building and scaling your engineering and AI teams. I think this is a very relevant conversation, right? Because we were talking a lot about team building earlier in the day. So super excited for this. We're going to start with very quick intros. Gennady was already up here, so you maybe remember him, but we'll start with Gennady. Just tell us your name, your company, and a brief description of your engineering and AI team, since that's going to be the topic today.
Yeah, so it's the second time I'm here on the team. Thanks a lot for all this attention from the Gradient. Yeah. So I'm Gennady. I'm CEO and co-founder of CentML, also professor at the University of Toronto in computer science and computer engineering departments. And our company focuses on optimizing AI workloads, scale, and in terms of the size, the total size of our headcount slightly over 50 people, and about 35 of them are engineers.
Awesome. I'm Shrav, founder and CEO of Secureframe. Started Secureframe almost 6 years ago now. I think I work with Darian. I think we had like a coffee chat, and he's like, "Yeah, okay, we'll be down to invest," and that's how Secureframe essentially started. It was a really random coffee conversation, and yeah, today our team is around 200 people. I would say about maybe half, maybe even 70% of our engineering team is focused on AI-related development.
Cool. So let's jump in. First question, I've heard the term AI engineer thrown around a lot lately. Everyone is like, oh, I want to hire an AI engineer. So I'm curious your thoughts on this. How do you guys define AI ML on your teams?
Okay, so I'm happy to start. And
he has opinions.
Yeah. And I might disappoint a lot of people with my answer, but we actually don't hire AI engineers, right? So we actually hire a classical systems engineers, right? We don't create new models, we make them run efficient, and for that you need to know silicon, you need to know system stack, you need to know compilers, operating system libraries. So it's actually very classical engineers, but with the caveat that they need to understand the domain area of machine learning. So this is the people we are focused on, and those engineers are very hard to find because whoever understands like NVIDIA GPUs, Google TPUs, or can understand ML and can understand systems, usually in a very high demand.
Awesome.
Yeah, actually, I'm just kind of curious, how many folks here are building companies just like at the application layer, if folks know what that means? Okay, you don't actually need AI engineers. What you need is an API engineer, because all you do is you hit ChatGPT's API, Anthropic, Gemini, whatever it is. And that doesn't actually require like as much skill as people make it out to be. If you hire an AI engineer, you're going to pay 5 times more money for basically just hitting an API. So if you're building at the application layer, my sense is like you actually want to hire someone who's actually just has good product sense, knows how to prompt well. And look, no one can say that they're an expert in prompting or they're an expert, AI engineer, especially when you're working at the application layer on these, on essentially what I assume for most companies is the generative AI side of things. Like this stuff has been around for what, 2-3 years, and it evolves so quickly. So really, I think what we focus on at Secureframe is we've taken pretty much all of our best engineers, at least initially, and got them really good at using some of these tools. So everyone on our team is using Cursor right now. We switch up tools like literally every day. We give everyone like a ramp card, with like literally $200 a month of budget, so you could buy whatever AI tool that you want within reason and using it, and you have to use it responsibly in terms of like our security and everything. But really, like some of the best team that you have is kind of the one that you already have. Like you don't need to go out of your way to hire some $1 million AI engineer. That's kind of my take.
Yeah, it seems like the best engineers are experimenting with AI. They're using it, right? It's not something that you're going to have to like hire specifically for, especially if you're building at the app layer. So that makes a ton of sense. This actually leads really nicely into my next question, which is kind of about like the skill sets that you look for. So is there anything that stands out as like the most important skill set that you guys are looking for these days when hiring engineers? And I'm also curious, like if there's anything that you look for that others might overlook, where you're like, oh, this is really, really, really important, right? That you would not hire somebody without.
Yeah, we personally like to look for people that are not just tied to any particular layer of the stack, but actually willing to work across multiple layers. Because again, for us, we need to do things across application level, like ML frameworks, and then down to the low-level system level, and all down to the hardware. So people that not afraid to go across all that stack, understand it deeply, and can innovate there is very important. I don't think there's like just one particular skill set you're looking for. Obviously, if you want someone in your machine learning compiler team, you would look someone who wrote kernels before, familiar with something like CUDA or OpenCL, and understand this low-level stack. But there's no like one particular skills. A lot of these things you can teach. One thing we learned that it's easier to take a systems developer and teach them ML than the other way around. So it's like I also are not into the hype of paying for those 5x too expensive AI engineers in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, my thinking on this has like evolved over time. It really just depends on the stage of your company. And one of the hardest parts is, like, I imagine a lot of the companies here, you're probably trying to hire your first 10, 20 engineers still. And that's like literally the hardest phase to hire. In like a lot of recruiters that you might try to, work with, they're just not going to get you great candidates. You honestly have to kind of use your own network, people that you've worked with before. And you have to find kind of like undiscovered talent. Like I'll probably tell you, and even today, some of the earliest hires we made were people that would probably not get a job at most other companies. And you're going to start to realize this like over time is like I'm not really worried about, at least in the early days, I wasn't really worried about people stealing engineers from our team or them getting recruited away, because like you tend to end up hiring people that have flaws, but they're really unique or great in certain ways, and you have to kind of understand how to utilize that team. I think a lot of companies, they're like, oh my God, I got to hire this Harvard, MIT, CMU engineer that's like super cracked and all this stuff. And like, look, you guys are building stuff at the application layer. You need people who have good product instincts, people who want to work really hard. Like I'll give you an example. Just last week, a company I'd invested in, they really wanted to hire this, great engineer. It would literally cost them $2 million from Apple. And I'm like, okay, well, one, that's going to be like a good 1/5 of your funding. And by the way, if they worked at Apple, they're not going to, you might get a good 6 hours a day out of them, maybe 8 hours. And then you're going to feel really bad that you spent like $2 million a year on this candidate. And it'll inevitably, I see it like literally dozens of times a year, like you're going to end up wanting to fire them because you're just thinking constantly about how much money you spent. You want someone who has like a chip on their shoulder, quite frankly, to work for your company. Maybe they weren't able to get hired elsewhere for whatever reason. Hopefully it's not skills. Like they still need to have some of the skills to make your company successful. But your job as a founder, especially in these early stages, is to find those gems in the rough and kind of help them bridge that last 20% that you need. I really don't see most companies doing it any other way.
Yeah, I like that input of finding the gems in the rough, right? I want to ask one more questions about skill set and then kind of get into where you guys see good talent coming from and talk a little bit more of like how to recruit. There's a lot of talk, and I think AI is changing the way that people are hiring in a lot of different ways, right? How you interview, maybe the number of engineers. So I'm just curious, how do you think skill sets are going to change over the next 2 to 5 years that you're hiring for? Do you think that there's going to be a shift? Do you think it's going to stay the same? I'm curious to hear thoughts on that.
I think there are going to be some skill set that definitely transfer, right? So, but there are clearly, there's going to be a trend right now to use less and less engineers in general for more routine tasks. For a lot of time before, like people would need to use a lot of engineers to do a lot of plumbing work, a lot of integration, especially if you work with enterprise customers. I feel quite confident right now this can be automated, right? A lot of these things, like you still would hire people, but you need way less people, and you don't need to hire as many people with such a specialized skills. Again, I think the people that actually had a more holistic view of the system they built, that would be in the high demand of obviously people with a good product instincts. They're always, very important to hire. And again, they're probably not coming from the famous companies, big companies, but coming from all over different backgrounds, right? Yeah. So you need to look for them, right? So I avoid making any predictions beyond 2 years because like all the predictions we made 3 years ago are all off by now, by pretty much anyone. So I'll just stay away from that.
Yeah, totally. I get it. Things change fast, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I hire people who can just learn and move really quickly. In the early days of Secureframe, I think I was practically like just begging people to join the company. I'm like, oh, here's what we could do for you, blah, blah, blah. This equity is gonna be worth this much. I don't do that stuff anymore. It's a worthless exercise to basically just try to compel or manipulate someone into joining your company. You should definitely sell the company, the opportunity, and everything about it. But I kind of have to leave the last 50% up to the candidate to decide. Otherwise, like when things get hard, and they always do if you're at a startup or maybe you're not disrupting enough. Those are the first people to leave. They're the first people to create a lot of negative sentiment. You need people who have a lot of grit, a lot of strength, who can learn a new role every 6 months, especially at the early stages. That's what you should be looking for. I'll just tell you, some of my worst hires were probably really great on paper, but when things got hard, when I needed some people to pull an all-nighter here and there, we do that. They're the first ones to just shit all over me, get really upset, create toxicity in the company, just stuff that's not really helpful. And sometimes you need people who are really gritty, who will do anything, run through walls. Like at Secureframe, I easily have 20 to 30 people where I'm like, I need you to jump off a cliff, and they'll ask how high. And those are the type of people that you want to keep close and do whatever you can to make sure that they're successful in their own careers, even beyond your company. As far as the skill sets that I'm seeing are most valuable, it's again learning to learn. And one of the things I do in every interview now is I ask a candidate to screen share and basically say, share me your screen, pull up ChatGPT, whatever tool you use, and I want to see how you use it in the interview with all the questions I give you. If you're trying to hire AI native people, it's kind of a good trick to see, okay, I can see how you're prompting it, and you're prompting it like an amateur.
I'm so curious, how many people in the audience are using ChatGPT or another AI tool in their interview process? That's less than I expected, actually. Okay, so maybe an interesting thing to test out for some folks who are not using it already. I like that. Mm-hmm. Okay, I want to talk about the actual kind of recruiting process now. So where are you guys seeing the best talent coming from?
Yeah, for us, there is no just one specific. You need to search for candidates across all different domains, all different countries. So for us, it depends on the specific teams. For example, for certain jobs, again, low-level compiler optimization stuff, I mostly hire either top students from University of Toronto, where I'm a professor, and University of Waterloo. This is the two top schools in Canada to get the top talent. Yeah. I also had built over years some pipelines from the top Chinese and Indian schools. So I got some really good talent from there. Mm-hmm. Then for some other teams in our company, for example, that work closer to the platform level in the cloud, I mostly hired people from startups with the former startup experience. Right, I occasionally hire from my competitors as well. That's a very good, source of talent as well, because you know what they're good at, and you can steal some people there. In terms of big brand names, I usually not hiring people that exclusively work on the big brand names only. Right, mm-hmm. They tend to be they're like a tool that was tuned for one particular job, and they're not as agile what you need in a startup. And again, you want people that do this all-nighters. That's unavoidable, so you want this. Some of my best hires also came out of recommendations of my existing hires. Mm-hmm. So you got someone said oh my God, this is the best product manager I ever worked in my life. I immediately try to get that person. And they might not have mind-blowing CV, but when they start to work, you see why they're so good, right? Mm-hmm. So I try to pretty much everyone who gets on board and we like them, we actually ask them whom they like as well. And we try to get that talent. And I would rather pay a little bit more to these people than a random person from a famous company, right? Yeah. So we, most of the people from the usual suspects of hiring out of Apple, Google, AWS and others, they end up being, you need to overpay, right? A lot. Yeah. And they won't be happy, and they had very high bar. Even if they said, oh, I'm willing to try startup, they really don't know what they are committing to, especially if they spend all their life in the corporate culture. They like their 9-to-5 type of schedules, and out of a sudden, this is all broken, right? Yeah. So I wouldn't say that I'm just looking for gems in the mud, because that's also very time consuming. So it's a mixture of different approaches, right? You look for people in all the different, areas. You look and where the talent is and not willing to move. Like, for example, Eastern Europe, I try to get some talent from there. So you look for different opportunities, right? So there's not just one thing. But yeah, like the one thing I can say that, I like hiring from top university if the people are not overpriced, but I usually don't hire expensive people from brand names in terms of companies.
Yeah, okay, great.
For Secureframe, I would say at this point, it's probably like 80% referrals from existing employees. And I think it just helps a lot. Like, we weigh employee referrals very heavily, and we tell people like, hey, your reputation, you're staking them on this person, by the way, when you refer them, just so it's extra abundantly clear, and they know that you're basically the person's hiring buddy if they were to join, and you know what it means to join Secureframe. You're going to have to probably work really hard. You might have to pull some all-nighters. There's a certain expectation and bar, and so whoever's referring that person knows exactly what they're bringing their friend or whoever else into. In fact, I think one of the most kind of important philosophies or I don't know what to call it, is like everyone kind of needs a best friend at work that they can imagine themselves working with. And if you can find that person, it's much, much more helpful for retention as well. Like, those 2-3 people will probably not leave. Or maybe they'll leave as a group. But I would say referrals is one of our top sources. It's not super helpful maybe at the early stages. If I have to think about where our first few hires came from, the first 2 to 3 department leaders I just recruited from my network. I was like, hey, Chris, I need you to come in and do sales for us. And by the way, this is the demo, this is the pitch. We have no material. Can you just figure it out? And I need you to start Monday. And he's like, no. And then I talked to him over the weekend, and he joined on Monday. And the first kind of non-network hire I made, we used a recruiter. It was really hard to kind of find these external hires, and this person, I would say, didn't have maybe the best background on paper, but he sent so many follow-up emails to us. I was like, I got to give this guy a shot. He's a hustler, and I think today he's like a COO at another portfolio company that I invested in, and he's doing phenomenally. That's great. I love that. That's awesome that you have 80% of your candidates coming from referrals. That's huge. Yeah. Oh, and one thing I'll add that I do now, I don't try to push to get people to join too hard. We do give them the sell, but we do a much softer sell. In fact, what we do now is the anti-sell. Here are all the reasons you shouldn't work at Secureframe. And no hard feelings. If what I told you, you're like, I'm going to leave this guy a bad Glassdoor review, fine. I'm just going to save a lot more money and headache down the line. Yeah, I like that. I think that's really good to do at the early stage as well, because especially if you're hiring people who are coming from bigger companies, right? Really trying to scare them away, I think can be kind of effective. And if they keep coming back, then you're like, okay, maybe I'll give you a chance, right? Yeah. And we try to do it tastefully. I'm being a little bit unhinged right now. It's okay. I like the unhinged. One thing that I think comes up for a lot of our founders is feeling this pressure to have to move fast, right? Time is kind of limited, money is limited. But of course, especially your early engineers, right? I feel like you need to maintain a really high bar. So how have you guys kind of balanced that when recruiting, especially your early engineers? Yeah, I think at CentML, I would say we started by, a lot of my initial engineers were coming out of my research group, right? So with them, I already did many years of hiring internally for internships, for full-time, PhD students. So we had a very high bar. We know it's higher than most of the, top-tier companies already. Yeah. And there was that fork on the road, we need to grow fast, so I need to get more people quickly. But that might compromise the bar. And there was always fight, especially when you hire your head of talent. That person wants to bring up, more people on board to satisfy your needs, but people keep failing your bar, right? And that happens. So advice from a lot of senior friends I had in industry was Gennady, as long as you can afford not to drop the bar, keep it high, up to your first 100 employees. So it was challenging, I have to say. We didn't drop the bar, and because of that, the growth in the engineering talent at the beginning was tough. What helped us is because it got a lot of internal hires of the people I already know, and we rely heavily in the first year and a half on those I wouldn't even call them referrals. It's my current and former PhD students or people that we know really well.
And I gradually tried to bring up people. And I would say that even the people we brought up that was outside of this cohort, in the first year probably was still weaker than the people we're getting right now. Because like even despite all the attempts, we still didn't get the same talent that you get when you get more visibility, you get more funding, people know about you, that becomes easier over time. So it's not like perfect. In terms of adjusting to the changes in the market, I would say that the key skill set I mentioned before, they stay true for us over the whole 3 years. So yes, models keep changing, and new applications in AI, all this coming, but the skill set we need is still more or less the same, right? You need to learn new things, you need to be agile and adapt to what's needed, but I think the core skill set is still the same, right?
Yeah. Early on, like, I was doing a lot of the engineering myself, along with our CTO, and I remember our kind of first operations hire, we actually just needed more people to code, so we just taught him HTML to just do front end. Again, this is like the skill of like hiring people who can just learn things on the fly, right? Like even our VP of finance today can code. I tend to hire people who just have like high technical aptitude and can figure these things out. Like he's using Cursor every day to like create real-time cash flow. And I was like, oh, I didn't even consider that was something we'd want to automate or care enough about. But these new AI tools are really like evolving and making it easier for everyone to learn these new skills. But sorry, back to the original question, like with your first few hires, like I think one kind of pool of talent, if you're having trouble hiring, that's I think really overlooked right now is new grads. There are a lot of really great new grads, even from top schools, that you can right now hire on the cheap. Like I just look at like the inbound applications that we get at Secureframe every day. Unfortunately, we do need more senior folks for us right now, but we probably have like 3 new grad mid-level folks for every senior staff engineer. And I would say the vast majority of our code in terms of like the volume of code that's written tends to come from this group of folks. And it has to be more carefully reviewed by the senior and staff engineers, and the architecture has to tend to be done by those folks. But you can get a lot done with those high, just high energy, high powered folks, and you can kind of build a good brand name. It just gets, one of the things I've learned is as you get bigger and bigger, it just gets easier to recruit quality talent. It's that early, first, 25 to 50 employees where things are like actually pretty tough on the recruiting scale. So one way you could do it is like hire new grads from top schools. You can literally hire them for like well under market right now.
Yeah. I'm so curious, Gennady, it seems like you were able to hire your first kind of group of folks, like because you knew them already from university. But Shrav, I'm curious, like how long did it take you to hire your first, let's say like 3 to 5 engineers? Do you remember?
Oh yeah. I think it took about 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty long time.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting to hear, because I think a lot of folks kind of struggle with that, right? Of like, we need to hire somebody now, but you do want to maintain that quality. Do you guys have any other advice on hiring your first 10 engineers? Anything else that you think is really important that you would just call out?
Yeah, my advice would be quite useless to most people. So essentially, day one, I had 9 engineers in my team, because that's like I was preparing for it, right? So by the time we said, okay, we're doing it, like I just asked, and then 9 of them sign up, essentially, right? So it was relatively quick for us. After that, it was not easy. So it took like getting to whatever to 20 people is tough, and the next few people were not easy to hire, especially because the first 9-10 people I hired were very high bar. I know them, they're high quality. So you're not going to hire weaker people, right? But at the same time, you don't have visibility on the market yet. You're barely out of stealth, right? So it's hard to convince people. We also were not in the Bay Area. We were in Toronto. So it means that you need to rely on a few people. A lot of people there don't know startups as much as in the Bay, right? So because of that, you ended up being like struggling sometimes to convince them what the shares really means, why you should just buy into this whole startup world. As time goes, it was gradually easier. Like not easy, it's still competitive, right? When you say about like it's easy to get the best junior talent, I would say it's still very competitive, right? Maybe like I'm not sure about under market price. I think they had a lot of options. Like the very, very top graduates from the top 20 schools in US still had plenty of options, in my opinion. yes, the maybe market is not as good as it used to be a year ago, but it's still very competitive. Like pretty much for anyone who want to hire, I always need to fight for a few other options that they have. It's very rare that they don't have any other options. It's very unusual for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess technically the market price is the market price. There's no such thing as under market. But yeah, so I do think it's important to keep the hiring bar high. And one of the things that means is like if you're finding a lot of gems in the rough, it means that you're gonna have to fire probably a little bit more than usual. And my recommendation is to fire fast. There was too many times where we just like, oh, we have to build this one feature for a customer that this, not so great engineer is like working on, but we still need him or her to, finish this project. And I think like probably 10 times out of 10, we would have probably been better off had we moved on from that person quicker. I also highly recommend work trials. Yeah, I do think, yes, some of the best new grads, like it's still pretty competitive, but the funnel is just so wide and we have a good way to filter people out. By the time I'm doing an anti-sell interview, we have a pretty good idea that it's not gonna rub them the wrong way. It's probably gonna get them more excited to join. Like, hey, here's what the culture's about. We work hard, we do these things. And like they're kind of already ready to opt in. I know I kind of maybe gave a more brief description of that before. But I do think like still today, new grads are super underlooked. Like you could definitely have way too many on your team early on, but if you need to crank code, you need to get a lot of stuff done, you just need to reach that milestone to get to the Series A or the Series B, like those folks can be really good and you'll get better and better talent over time. A lot of people just don't want to be the first 10 people to join your company. But when you're like 25 people, there's a whole new set of people that are willing to join and it gets a bit easier. That's kind of what I've seen. So don't worry about it like too much, but yeah, you can't keep on bad talent. Like that's unacceptable.
Yeah. A lot of things have changed, I think, since both of you started building your teams in the market, in the environment. I'm curious if there's anything you would do differently if you had to build from scratch today.
Yeah, I think one challenge for me that I had to learn over time is that when I hired mostly in academia, we usually don't hire with then, like I say, a PhD student with the intent that they might be fired, right? Here, again, you need to realize that no matter how good of a job you do with screening people, all these interviews, coding interviews, all of that, there's still going to be mistakes in hiring, no matter how perfect it is. And you need to realize that and, make a tough decision quicker. At the beginning, it was a bit tougher for me to make those, like you want to give people chances. And retrospectively, I realized that it's usually when there is a early signals that something goes bad, it usually ended up being bad, right? Mm-hmm. So it's usually things don't recover. So I think just iterating more, just admitting the fact that we're not going to be perfect with our hiring procedure, and you need to hire more, and some people won't be able to keep up with the bar, that's just a reality, right?
Yeah. If I could change anything, it would definitely be less remote. For a couple of reasons. I think one is like remote, there are some really great people that you could probably only hire remote, but I think it works best at a startup when that person's kind of perpetually online. Checking out has a whole different definition when you're remote. If you're coming in person, you're still kind of working, hands on keyboard, still getting stuff done, but maybe you're not fully motivated. When you're checked out remotely, you're not even checking in, to your computer or anything like that. Like you're just straight up not working, not contributing. You're probably starting to create like a bit of toxicity to the culture and creating a culture where other people think it's okay to start doing that same thing, and it can kill companies. And there's been at least 5 people in Secureframe's history over the last 6 years where like we've caught them just basically not working and have had to confront their managers, about the whole thing. And they're like, no, this person's working. And I'm like, we're a security company. We have laptop software. This person hasn't even opened their computer in 2 weeks. Explain. And I don't give second chances for things like that. It's just like once you kind of break trust, it's guaranteed to happen again. Like my rule at Secureframe is like, if I can't give you my social security number or personal credit card and know nothing's going to happen with it, then like we don't actually have trust. Is the way I'd put it. And like trust is so much more important when you're remote. So really think about that. Like I know what my friends that are my age do all day, and it scares me. So that's why you really have to be more on top of it. And it's also just like people that are in office, you're hiring people who are just way more motivated typically. So I would say that's probably one thing I would wish I did less of. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, we have to wrap up. This is a super interesting conversation. Thank you both. I think if anyone has more questions for either of them, I think you guys will be sticking around for happy hour, so feel free to find them. But they're great folks to learn from, right? They've scaled some awesome teams so far. So that's it for us. Darian and Zach are actually going to come back and give some final remarks just to close us out before tonight's scaling session. So we'll get off and we'll let them come on. Thanks, everyone.